To Tête-à-Tea session organized by the Prabha Khaitan Foundation. Tête-à-Tea is one such exclusive initiative that allows patrons to rendezvous with international legends and stalwarts from the world of literature, words, and performance arts and engage in enriching conversation. Prabha Khaitan Foundation is an NGO based out of Kolkata and endeavors to address the cause of women through boutique events curated for like-minded literary enthusiasts across 30 cities in India and overseas. When the world plunged into the grimness brought by the pandemic, the foundation geared up its efforts to ensure that patrons are not deprived of their passion for literature and reformatted sessions to go virtual. Word lovers can now tune into the various sessions from the sanctity of their homes and interact with multifarious authors. Our guest for the evening is the former Bureau Chief of BBC New Delhi and well-known author, Sir William Mark Tully. In conversation with him, we have Lady Mohini Kent Noon, author, filmmaker, journalist, and charity worker. She has authored several books and cookbooks, while also writing and directing feature films like The Ramayan and Curry Tiffin. She's the founder chairperson of LILY, Against Human Trafficking. I request Lady Mohini Kent Noon to take us through this journey of Sir Mark Tully. Thanks.
Thank you, Archana, for that welcome. Abhinandan Tully Sahib. I know you speak fluent Hindi, and yet we are going to have this conversation in English, which is a comment on people like me who are products of Catholic convent schools and stepchildren of the Raj. I hope one day we can have another conversation about what you described as our crumbling colonial pillars, especially in education. Sir Mark Tully wanted to be a priest, but he became a journalist. And he has observed that Hinduism is different because of its ability to adapt, which is why so many faiths can survive here and thrive. And we must also have a conversation about modern India and Hinduism one day. He is a living witness to our recent history, and he was one of the first journalists allowed into Bangladesh after the War of Independence. He covered the suspension of civil rights under Indira Gandhi's infamous emergency, the Indian Army attack on the Holy Golden Temple in Amritsar, the Union Carbide calamity, political corruption, bonded labor, Sufi mysticism. Indeed, Sir Marx was the trusted voice of the BBC in India for 30 years, and he became a cult figure. He has been awarded the Padma Bhushan by the Indian government, the prestigious Red Ink Lifetime Achievement Award of the Mumbai Press Club, and other awards, and a knighthood from the Queen of England. It has been said that few foreigners manage to get under the skin of Indian democracy as he can. But Sir Mark, isn't that a bit thick to refer to you as a foreigner after you've lived here for 64 years and you've only lived for 20 years in England? And I believe you enjoy chewing pan because it settles your stomach and it helps you to think. And do I need to say any more? You were born in Calcutta, in Tollygunge, in 1935, when Kipling's spirit was still alive and kicking. And your family ties to Calcutta went back to 1857. As a white child in a sea of brown, you were taught how not to be an Indian. So please do tell us about your childhood and that world.
Well, you put it very nicely, Molly. We were told and taught how not to be Indians. One of the prime aims of our parents and of the European society in Calcutta in general was to make sure that children grew up as little Englishmen or English women or Scottish women, Scottish women and Scottish men. To the extent that I should have been sent back to England to school at the age of about 5. But happily, very happy for me, the war came, there was no shipping, so we couldn't be sent back to England. So we were sent up to Darjeeling. And actually the happiest school days I had in my life were in Darjeeling at a special school which was existing from the war and was set up just for children.
Your voice
of
is
English children.
breaking up a little bit. Maybe you're too close. I lost a few words there. Yeah.
How is that now?
That is better. Yeah.
Yes. Yes, so we went to Darjeeling to this special school which was set up for English children. And I stayed in that school until I was 9 plus.
What was Calcutta like at that time? And I think there was a very rigid class system. Were you aware of it or were you too small?
It was a lovely life as far as we were concerned. We hated the thought of leaving Calcutta. And my eldest sister maintains that it was such a shock to leave it that she can hardly remember any of it. I remember a lot of it. But my parents were prosperous. My father was a partner in a well-known Calcutta firm, Galanders Arbuthnot. I'm proud to say, because I'm a great railway enthusiast myself, that my father was a director of the Darjeeling Himalayan Railway, because Galanders Arbuthnot were the agency for the railway. So we had a life of Riley, really. The only problem we had was we had a European nanny. And the European nanny was there to perform the job, really, of making sure that we didn't get too close to the servants. Didn't learn to speak Hindi, which is something I regret deeply. I wish, like Rudyard Kipling, I had learned Hindi from the servants. And Nanny kept eagle eye on us all the time we got up to the time we went to bed. So when we went off to school, it was a bit of a relief in a way because we were free of Nanny. But basically, as I said, nothing, we lacked for nothing. We were, in a way, completely ignorant of the Bengal famine when that took place. We lived a very sheltered and isolated English life, best way of putting it.
And what was the feeling you got from your parents? I mean, you must have had some sense of servants in the house, deliveries. Were you fascinated by this world beyond the garden or didn't think about it?
I think, if I'm honest, Miney, I didn't think we thought much about it. My parents had some Indian friends. Indians came to dinner parties. Of course, my father had Indians who worked with him and worked for him. And we had the servants, and we were very, very fond of the servants, as children do become very fond of them. I remember one of them called Jaffa, who was the nursery boy. Every time he went back to his village, he would come with a little present for us,
Oh,
which
nice.
was charming, considering that he wasn't paid that much. We were coming from a wealthy family. I thought it was wonderful. But no, we didn't really think much about it. And the strange thing is that I never really thought that much about India when I went back to Britain, when I got involved in the prep school, public school, army, university, all that dreadful routine, one just became busy doing that and forgot about it.
Before we come to your school in Britain, I just want to ask you what sort of food you ate when you were growing up. Was it very English? Because I made a film called Curry Tiffin, which is on the history of India through food. And in clubs, and in fact, I shot it, some of the scenes at Tollygunge Club. And the food was made as English as possible, pish pash and roly-poly pudding. So did you have Indian food at your table, or was it very English?
No, it was basically English. We had curries, I remember them, but there probably you would be able to tell me what sort of curries they were, but somehow or other they were very standard. And it was more like a stew with curry powder in it, I think. And rice. I don't remember, maybe I'm 84 now, so my memory is not that great, but I don't remember, for instance, having chapatis. Always rice, and usually rice had raisins as well. So when we had Indian food, it was very Anglicized.
Yeah.
And we we were taught very strongly that to be very cautious about water, to avoid things like ice creams and that sort of thing. And hygiene was very high on our agenda as well.
Well, I must just talk about a couple of things which I came across in the research for my film, because Queen Victoria wanted a curry, and her Swiss chef sort of mixed curry powder and produced something quite revolting. So the Queen revolted, and she got an Indian to then cook her curries. And the Nizam of Hyderabad, when he, I've forgotten who the viceroy was at that time, he invited them to breakfast, and he gave them 14 courses, including souffle and all that, because he didn't know what to do. But tell me, when you went to England, and actually you went to Marlborough School, where the future Queen of England is from, also Kate Middleton, what was England like? What did you feel when you arrived there?
We hated it. You see, we arrived just at the war was ending. The ship we sailed on, the war was still going on. When we went to the Irish Channel, we were escorted by the Royal Navy through the Channel. So rationing was involved.
I think when you come closer, there's a crackle. So I think you need to maybe sit back a little bit. Yeah.
Rationing was there in all its with all its limitations. So you couldn't, for instance, you could buy a very limited number of sweets or chocolates, ice creams, all those sort of things. So, and we, as I said, we had no experience of food shortage. The weather was horrible. And my mother, from being someone who was much involved with the Red Cross and all those sort of things, was tied to the kitchen sink. And of course, I was deeply shocked to see her doing washing up and that sort of thing. And when we went to school, we were banged straight into boarding schools. The food was atrocious, was the only answer. In my prep school, the food was so bad that the parents formed a committee to complain about it. One of the items on the agenda was you did get a bit of bacon, but to make that go further, you had bits of bread soaked in bacon fat. And you're right, we had roly-poly puddings of various sorts. custard, with treacle, with raisins, and all that. And lots of potatoes to fill us up.
You were made a peer of the realm, I mean, not a peer, sorry, a knight of the realm in 2002. And it's interesting because my late husband was on the same honors list, and also Ben Kingsley, with whom I've made 2 films. But we would have all gone at different times to Buckingham Palace. What did you feel? Was it a very momentous, grand occasion? Was it very long? What did you feel about? And I think it was Prince Charles, not the Queen, whom you met.
Yes, well, that's a very interesting question, because I had long discussions with Tully before I accepted this, because there is a school of thought which says that if you are a journalist, you shouldn't accept honours, because that means that you're in some way committed to the government. And so I thought about it a long time, but then 2 things influenced me. One, I knew that this had been suggested or proposed by the High Commissioner, and I had great respect for him. And I felt it would be very ungracious to say I went to accept it. And B, I knew my mother would love it. My mother was still alive. And so for those 2 reasons, I also thought to myself eventually that, you know, you're taking yourself too seriously, you'll be very pompous and trying to present yourself as a great man of principle. So I received it, and my mother and Tully came to Buckingham Palace, my mother in a wheelchair, and she was thrilled about it. And of course, it is, after all, a great honor, as you know yourself.
Nice. You mentioned the railways, and you've...
Can I just tell you a funny story about
Yes.
It would interest you very quickly. The High Commissioner very kindly gave a very large reception for me when I came back after going to Buckingham Palace. And one of the guests there was Ravi Shankar. Ravi Shankar, I knew
Voice is cracking up a little bit. Can you repeat that? Yeah.
One of the guests was Ravi Shankar. And I knew Ravi Shankar because we made a program together. And he was a lovely man. And so I was talking to him at this reception. He said to me, "I'm very envious of you." And I said, "Why?" He said, "Well, you see, I have also got a knighthood, but because I'm a foreigner, I'm not allowed to call myself Ravi Shankar. But you're English, so you can call yourself that."
Yes, you're quite right. So you mentioned the railways, and you said you're very passionate about the railways, and you made films of railway journeys. I must tell you, my dad was on the railways, and his father before him. And my father had a railway salon, and it had 3 bedrooms and a bathroom, kitchen, pantry. So we carried our stuff with us. And really, it was magic. You know, it was a magic train. But what do you feel about, you know, the hullabaloo on the railway stations and in the compartments and steam engines? And tell us a little bit why you're fascinated by the railways.
Well, I think one of the reasons I'm passionate for the railways is nostalgia, because the railways, from when I was very young, we would go by holiday on holiday from Howrah, Puri, or to Hazaribagh, and then of course I went to Darjeeling from Sialda, changing to Biguri. So railways were always part of it. B, I think, is the magic of steam. There is no machine which is as human in its behavior and in its appearance as steam engines. And I have to boast and tell you that I'm vice president of the Indian Steam Railway Society,
Sorry, I missed that. If you can sit back, Mark. I don't know why we lose your voice nearer. Yes, sorry.
I'm vice president of the Indian Steam Railway Society, which is a great honor. So it was partly that, and partly I'm always fascinated by the organization. As you know, it's a far more complicated operation getting a railway train from Delhi to Madras than it is to get an aeroplane or a car or anything else. Far more people are involved, far more things can go wrong in many ways, and there's a great complication about it. My passion for railways is such that I hate with an equal passion airplanes, because what they've done to railways, I think they're ghastly. And I have to say, I don't think that I hope to God it's not possible to invent an even more boring way of traveling than flying. So railways really my passion and blood, and there was my father directed the DHR.
You know, they have excellent catering on the railways. In fact, they used to cater to the Indian Parliament. I don't know if they still do, but very, very good catering. But I want to, because and I have lots of memories and anecdotes of our journeys, but I think.
Well, I'm sorry to tell you, Miney, that the catering is not good now. Of course, in your childhood days, probably, certainly in my childhood days, there were still restaurant cars. And restaurant cars were lovely institutions. They were dining restaurants on wheels. Now you get your food on at your seat or on your bunk. When I say the food is not good, I actually have to correct this. It depends what train you travel. If you go on much time, then I find food is always excellent on much time. The last time I went to Rajlani was to Delhi, and we had some coffee as soon as we got on the train, and we had lunch, and we had dinner, and we had breakfast next day, and all of them were very good meals.
But I want to also ask you about media. And you know, you said somewhere, this country has a terrible history of going through traumas, and then nothing happens. Everything goes on as if nothing had happened. Now, while that is a general comment on governance, I feel that it's an indictment of the Indian media, especially television, where stories are covered very hysterically until the next sensation crops up. And the viewer is never told what the end of any major important issue is or any important story. Would you like to talk? I mean, having been a media man all your life, I'm sure you got lots of views.
Well, I would absolutely agree with you. I think it's a fault of our media people everywhere, but particularly in India. You have people who are crucified, basically, when investigations start into them or when there is some row or some rumpus. People are crucified. And then when the media does the next story, that person is completely forgotten. And the last thing the media will do, unfortunately, I find, is to go back and if the person is found to be not guilty, that's never reported. This breaking news media, which has got worse and worse, is, I think, it very means we are being starved, really, of information which we should be getting.
Yeah, and I have never understood why the issue is never followed through. And to some extent, the sensationalism is quite superficial. So what is the actual issue behind it? And the personalities, and as you say, everything is then cast aside and we move on. So what is the solution to this? What can we do about it? Is it a school of journalism? It is, what is a
Well,
answer?
it's not schools of journalism, I don't think. It is the editors and the proprietors who are responsible. The proprietors very often being the main ones. Proprietors may be individuals, they may be shareholders. But they're looking for money, they're looking for profit. And they see profits in audience figures, and they think that the only way to get audience figures is to sensationalize and go to the top sensational stories. I've always maintained that the answer to this in India would be good service broadcasting on the lines of the BBC, because I do believe that in Britain, so far, I say so far for a reason. So far, the BBC, because of its independence, because neither the government nor any owner or shareholder can tell it what to broadcast, the BBC does have standards, which mean that other people at least know that many people will be looking at what the BBC says, and therefore if they become too sensational, people will be shocked or appalled by what they see. So there is a question of setting a standard. And unfortunately in India, your public service broadcasting is an arm of the government. My friend George Burgess worked so hard to try and get an independent organization set up, but it hasn't really worked like that. And therefore, you have no standards to go by. That's the problem. Now, one thing I should add, and that is that the present Conservative government in Britain is very hostile to the BBC. And I have been told that, well, they announced that it's a plan that the license fee, which is what the BBC depends on, is to be decriminalised. In other words, it's no longer going to be a criminal offence if you don't pay your license fee. And of course, if that happens, probably half the people won't bother to pay their license fee, and then the whole finance of the BBC.
That has very far-reaching implications.
Very far.
Yeah. And including on the quality of the programs.
Yes, I certainly believe so.
By the way, I must share with you that for 3 years, I did some work for the BBC in London. And it was to begin, for 2 years, I did it for BBC Radio 5 Live, and then for BBC Scotland. And it was very nice because they used to send the OB van to my home. And if I was having dinner elsewhere in the city, they would send the OB van there, you know. And I would just go down and make my broadcast. It was fun. But
what were you doing for the BBC?
yeah, I was writing for India Today, and I had London Diary column. I was doing quite a lot of journalism with. I wrote for the Sunday Times here, the Week magazine, the tablet in London, which you would know, but most people haven't heard about.
Yes, I used to write with that.
Then there was something called Asian People, and I think the People newspapers also folded up. So because of all that, I suddenly got a call one day from the BBC, and I think they took an interview on the phone just by chatting with me, and they said, "Can you do this?" I said, "Yes." And I was wondering who would listen to it. But one day I went to see my doctor and he had listened to it. So I said, oh, that's not bad. Somebody is listening to it out there, you know. But it was fun. I enjoyed it. And there's no visual aspect. So, you know, you can have your papers around you and everything. And it was...
Well, I tell you, man, that radio, in my view, is a far better, maybe the wrong word. I think it's really very quick about radio. Number one, it goes into your head much more than in the other media because you have to invent the pictures yourself, and therefore the pictures belong to you and stay with you. Number two, it's a much more intimate media because on the whole, usually
back mark, because your voice, when you come close, on
your own. Number two, and number three, of course, to do is much more skillful because you have to pay pictures or help viewers with their pictures. Whereas writing a script for television story is much easier. I know.
But you did some of your early reports to BBC Radio, I think straight on the phone, didn't you? There was no time because events were unfolding very quickly.
Yes, oh yes, well, we had to do a lot of those interviews, those situations.
Yes. Yeah. No, I think it's a wonderful medium, and in having, you know, we've had reverse lives because I've lived most of my life in London. And you have lived in India, but we generally had the radio on, especially Radio 4 in the background. Yes. And I always had classic FM in my car.
Yes.
Because, but you've written a number of books. Which is your favorite, would you say?
Well, the ones that one is best known for is is one which I wrote first, really. The first book I ever wrote was with Surya Matsan, when we made a program called From Raj to Raji, which was 40 years after independence. That I enjoyed. But the first book I really wrote for myself was and I think that's the best known one because partly because of the title, and it was a very controversial book. One reviewer said in his review in the Hindu, "This is a shame book," because I covered Sati, for instance. I think that if you just crudely criticize Sati without trying to understand what the tradition had meant and why it happens, then you were not going to prevent it happening again. And of course, this was mistaken by many people as saying you support stuff. And this reviewer said, "This is a shameful book." So Gilly immediately said, "Oh, you should put that on the back cover. That'll certainly sell them."
Yeah, whet everyone's appetites.
But the subject is very relevant to what's happening today, because it was really, what I was really saying was that India had not really got over its colonial hangover. I think that was true. That was not sufficiently Indianized. And when I was doing an interview with Karan Thapa, and he said I was drawing a picture of the building they did. And I said I was not drawing a picture of the building, but I said I would like to ask you one question. What would you like to see in India as a Asli Bharat or a Natli America? And that phrase is always, which I invented myself, has always struck with me since. And I think this is the struggle going on now again, still. The search for this I don't think that's over. It's not over because I don't think that's it's true stuff yet.
There's some questions coming in, so I will put them across to you. Can I request you to sit back, because I think the sound crackles for some reason. But
Yes.
there is a question from an aspiring journalist who says that when he is asked to choose between the truth and what the editor wants, what should he do?
Well, this sounds a very popular answer, but the fact is that I never had that problem when I was working at the BBC, because I knew that I knew we were known in India. People would say BBC, Sabse Pehle Kabadera, or Slack. And I knew that our whole reputation depended on being as near to the truth as we could be, saying what we actually saw, what we actually knew, not putting any spin on it like that. And that was what my editors required. One thing you know, which I think is so lacking in television today, is that as a BBC correspondent, I knew perfectly well that every morning and every early evening there will be meetings in London of the editors I was working for, whether they were in the 70s, whoever the story was, and my story would be reviewed. So I knew that I had the pressure of the Indian public on my back, and I had the pressure of my editors to be as accurate as I could be. And if I made mistakes, I soon heard back.
One of the questions is that you covered Indian politics so for so long and so extensively. What would you say would have been the most democratically productive period?
Most democratically
productive period when, you know, this democracy was really vibrant and alive and kicking. When, you know, I've got my own opinions on this, but you were actually covering it and searching for the truth. So how also how has it evolved?
Well, I think in many ways, the most democratically potentially was the people in because we should never forget that
Could you repeat that? I lost one line in between. I don't know what's happening with there is a little imp somewhere, I think, playing mischief. It must be the coronavirus.
I hope not. I think it was for me, the most productive was the Janta victory. And because we shouldn't forget, not 50 versions, which and if she had won it, I think it was very likely people wanted the versions, so we'll continue. Of course, the sadness is that the leaders threw that opportunity away by fighting amongst themselves rather than trying to consolidate the position and build a real opposition, a permanent opposition. So I think that was probably the most. If I can just say one other thing to that question, I think you know, the most democratically urgent thing to be for journalists to do is to report on the state of the institutions. Because you cannot have a democracy in which the institutions are not able, do not have the autonomy the independence to perform their independent function and to function as mutually reinforcing, mutually also keeping an eye on each other. And I think ever since the days of the gang, those institutions have declining, and I have to say that I think they are still not strong, autonomous, independent institutions that they should be.
So I have a question leading on from that, because India is, I find it's still got a very feudal society, and there is still quite a feudal mindset. It may be breaking down in the cities, but you know, I've really, since the age of 20, I've lived in London, and I know sort of the difference in the way people interact with each other. So, and through my charity, which is an anti-human trafficking Lily charity, obviously I come in contact with the sort of lowest level of society. Given the half the population are really poor and they're at the mercy of the ruling classes, and there is this feudal mindset. Is this really a democracy? Because during the elections, one hears of these, you know, promises and then the freebies that are given out. So I know, I mean, everyone's definitely got a vote, but then there are block votes and there's lots going. Would you say that this is a real democracy?
Yes, you know, every democracy has its faults. Democracy, we all know about what Churchill said about democracy being, you know, the worst form of government, but it doesn't a better one. Every democracy has its faults. First of all, we should never forget how India, from the very start up to independence, gave everyone respect. And I think that was hugely important. That still is. And I think, although you may say that feudal mindset does continue, there is no doubt there's a sea change over the last 70 years in attitude, or in the ability of Dalits to fight wars. I'm not saying it's perfect, I'm not saying the situation is perfect, but there's a huge change in that. And the other thing is, taking Churchill again, what alternative? No country that I can think of has benefited from the alternative usually suggested and usually offered, which is all power centered in a very small country of people and centered around one leader. I do not think that is the answer for India. In South Asia, it has never been the answer. You know, in Pakistan, General Ayub Khan was described as leading the ideal developing country because people were sort of hoodwinked by this concept of absolute power, being able to actually get things done, all that stuff. But actually, time and again, it turns out to be
But you have written about India in slow motion. So what do you think is the change accelerating? Or is it, you know, the history and the confusion is, you take one step forward and two steps backward and nobody knows where we are going?
No, I don't think you're taking steps backward. Forward. I think you could go forward faster, undoubtedly. And I think that one of the things I've talked about is having a government really function, which are not interfered with all the time by politicians. India would go ahead a lot faster, yes.
One of the questions is that you've had a very varied and fulfilling career. Is there something you still wish to do? Is there something on your wish list that you feel you haven't done and you need to complete? I think, Mark, when you sit back, the sound is somehow better. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yes. Well, there is something I'm very interested in. It's quite complicated, and I don't think I can do it. But I would like to write something which suggests that neither Hindu nor secularism is the right thing to do. What India should say is it is a country, um, uh, a religiously tolerant country. I believe that is the principle of India's culture, religious tolerance. And I think the problem with secularism is it has no place for religion. The problem with Hindu for me is that uh, it ignores other religions, which are very, very important. So that's what I would love to do, would be to write a book. But there is a problem, Moini. Every time I say, oh, here's another book I can read about this, I realize that so many people know so much more than I do. So I don't know if I'll ever get round to that.
But secularism shouldn't mean the absence of religion. It should mean that religion is to be practiced in your home instead of. I put another point to you, which may be controversial, but many years ago, I went to Rome and I interviewed Alain Denilou, who was a great Orientalist, and he wrote many, many books, including the Ragas of North Indian music, and he wrote on on Hinduism, because he was converted by, initiated by Swami Karpatri, who was a very big figure in Hinduism. And it was quite an eye-opener for me. I went and spent about 3 days in his estate in outside Rome, Zagarolo. And I was fascinated. He was like those Victorian adventurers, larger than life character. He lived in a koti in Banaras, which belonged to the Maharaja of Rewa. And he became a musician. He became a veena player. So, and he was obviously converted. His name was Shiv Saran, and he went back to the West. He made about 150 records, I think, including with Ravi Shankar and the Dagar brothers in the 50s, to talk about Hindu culture and spirituality. But he put it to me, he said, when the country was divided along religious lines, when there was no other rationale for the division except religion, then this one half should have been a Hindu country. If it was to be a secular country where religion's a private matter, then it should have remained undivided India. So this was the view of, a certain section of society, of course, and definitely of the religious wing.
Well, I think this is a very complicated subject, but I think that when politics and religion come together, then that is not good for either politics or religion, and religion becomes intolerant under those so in that way, I understand secularism. But if the impression of secularism is that it's the secularism that has been time, the secularism that is secularism, then in a country where a large number of people are very religious, that in my view cannot be the right way to do it. So you can have religion acknowledged in some ways without necessarily falling into being a theocratic state or something like
We are almost out of time, so I'll thank you, Sir Mark Tully, for doing this conversation. And I hope you got your overseas citizen of India, and now you can formally bring your two nationalities together. And, you know, I hope we can do a more in-depth thing about all the various issues thrown up another time. And I thank Sandeep Bhuttaria, the Prabha Khaitan Foundation, and all their team for this conversation.
I thank you. I thank you all the team. Thank you.
Thank you all. I hope you've enjoyed the session. I thank Sir Mark Tully and Lady Noon, who've taken out so much time from their busy schedule and presented such an interesting session. Thank you.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
Archana.